Hello, LinkedIn. Welcome to a new edition of the Leaders in Supply Chain live podcast and LinkedIn Live. I'm delighted to have with us today a great guest. We have Emer Cunningham, who's joining us. She has been for many years within the realm of supply chain. She's currently the Vice President for Internal Medicine Global Supply Chain at Pfizer. Well, she's had a fantastic career, quite unique in some ways, in many ways, because she started from engineering, then operational excellence, manufacturing, now in supply chain across end-to-end supply chain. She has done many different products and projects, and I'm very delighted that we can spare a few minutes today. And thanks for joining us, Emer.
No, thank you for the invitation, Radu. It's lovely to see you again, and looking forward to the discussion.
Super. So as always, friends that are following on LinkedIn, whatever time you might be following. So Emer is in UK. So good morning to Emer. Some of you might be in evening time already in Asia, different parts of Asia, Australia, it's evening. Post your questions in the comments and we will take it as we go. And first and foremost, I wanted to start with yourself and maybe a little bit about your story, your career, Emer. I know that you started as an engineer, manufacturing, ops excellence. Maybe tell us a little bit about, 25 years in 2 minutes.
25 years in 2 minutes, right? So I am a chemical engineer from University College Dublin. So I'm actually based in Ireland, not the UK, but same time zone. So I'll let you away with it. Chemical engineer from University College Dublin. I joined Pfizer as a process engineer in our active pharmaceutical ingredient plant here in Cork 25 years ago. And I spent a number of years in manufacturing. Then I moved into engineering, or really maintenance. So I led the plant maintenance function in Ringaskiddy for a couple of years. And then I took the first of what would be a number of secondments, initially in business operations. And then, as you mentioned, I moved into operational excellence. So at that time, Pfizer was embarking on a journey of operational excellence. And we started with that effectiveness journey, so Six Sigma. So I became a Six Sigma black belt, and I sort of led the transformation at a site in Lochbeg in Ireland. So that was the cultural change around making sure we did root cause analysis, looking at things like common cause, variation. And then we started to move into the efficiency piece, so lean. So I became a lean master initially at the site, looking at efficiency, point efficiency. But then I moved into a regional role looking at the connections. And I guess that was the start of moving to supply chain. When you start to look at efficiencies and you try to link, manufacturing in one side to the next, you start to see what the supply chain looks like. And it was a great experience because I got to do a lot of technology. So I had started in API, but now I did drug product, I did packaging, I spent a little bit of time in sterile injectables. So it gave me that kind of broad view of the industry. And we then started to look at end-to-end supply chains. So we started to put together these value stream maps of what a pharmaceutical product looks like from start to end. And I think the piece for me at that point that was missing was the connection to the customer, because we didn't really have a connection into commercial. We were doing this within manufacturing and supply. So I had an opportunity to move into supply chain, initially within quite a tactical role as what we would call a brand supply leader, and then into product portfolio management. And that was really the end-to-end, and the product portfolio lead would face into commercial. 25 years, lots of different experiences, but I guess all sort of moving in one direction, and more realization as I traveled that supply chain is the full picture, right? It's that holistic view of what we make, what the customer wants, and how we put them together.
The analogy that I like the most, and I found it, I'm a simple, I didn't come from you, from your background. I'm not an engineer by design. John Gatorna wrote the first book that I read 8-10 years ago. Once I ended up doing consulting in supply chain, was his book, and he says that supply chain is the nervous system of the organization, because it kind of enables all the different parts of the organization to move. So I like your analogy as well. And I want to bring it also, are you currently, so just also to preempt anybody asking you about vaccines, and so you're doing on the internal medicine.
So my team is the internal medicine global supply chain team, and we are the team that sit between manufacturing and commercial. So we face into commercial and we sit with them and understand what their strategic direction for the products are. And then we turn around and we face into Pfizer Global Supply and say, well, what does a supply chain to deliver that vision look like? How do we put it together? What sites are involved? What's the logistics that's associated? And then we work very closely with our regional colleagues, colleagues in the markets, colleagues in the plants to actually deliver that. So internal medicine is the business unit in Pfizer that looks at some of those conditions that affect millions of people. So we have a broad women's health portfolio, we do cardiovascular, pain, CNS. So it's about 400 brands, about 9,000 SKUs that we globally orchestrate across the world. So it's good on the vaccine. I mean, we're so Pfizer proud of the vaccine. But if anybody has any detailed questions on it, that's really, it's not my space. I mean, we're all so proud of it and we're all supporting it. But obviously, we've got a team that are specifically dedicated to looking at it.
Thanks for that clarification, because I'm pretty sure there might be. So, and I just want to build a little bit on what you shared, because it is often that in the work that we do, we come across this disconnect where, and I liked your trajectory in your career, right? So you're engineering, manufacturing, but then there's a gap in a lot of organizations because they operate in silos where, well, you don't really think of the customer. You're very focused in, I'm designing the best product, not necessarily asking, does this product actually help my client? Does the client actually see that, right? I like how your organization is structured. It's kind of like the link, bridging that, commercial versus, the people that actually make the product, right? So tell us a little bit, maybe, why did Pfizer, I mean, it may seem obvious why they structured it like this, right? But tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, and I mean, it certainly was an evolution, right? I don't think we immediately said this is the gap, right? But like many organizations, we're an asset-based organization within manufacturing and supply, right? We've got a network of sites, both internal and external, and we run those sites in ways that are efficient and effective and deliver quality product. But we recognize that sometimes we're delivering them in a way that the customer doesn't necessarily want or need, right? Whether that's in terms of the proliferation of different presentations, or it's the cost that we're delivering. So we had been doing this end-to-end value stream mapping. We had been looking at lead time, trying to determine the link between lead time and inventory. And it became through again and again and again through that sort of lean philosophy that unless you really know what the customer wants, you're not necessarily delivering what they need. So we recognized that there was a gap to fill for people to sit in commercial, and I'm sure it's the same in many industries. Very often manufacturing and commercial people, we speak different languages, right? We say things in different ways and we don't always understand each other. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we have translators in the middle that are sitting and understanding margin, market trends, what an LOE really means for a product, why we need 50 different presentations of the same tablet, and then turning around and explaining that to manufacturing. So it became a journey as we had gone through it. And now we have it in place for all of our business units. We have what we call product portfolio leaders who are responsible for long-term supply chain design. So they look at long-range volume forecasting, they do capacity analysis, and they're responsible for that supply chain design. And then we have brand supply leaders who are responsible for the execution of that. So they work with the sites on shorter term demand. They work really closely with our markets, our above market planners, to make sure that inventory is in the right place, that we've looked at forecasting. So yeah, it was a journey, and I think we're still on it, right? And sometimes we don't always translate correctly, and we still don't get it right. But it has been, I think, an evolution in our organization that we see adds a lot of value to our supply chains.
I like your positive frame when you say that some sales don't speak the same language as manufacturing. I would argue that most sales don't speak the same language as, whether it's manufacturing or supply chain at large. We're literally, as part of the next summit, that we're doing a summit in 2 weeks, and we're literally putting together storytelling meaning communication, influencing, how do you convey a message training, because it's a big disconnect. And then usually, and actually I want to ask you, right, because you came from that engineering background, and engineers tend to be practical, right? Get stuff done. Look, I mean, that many trucks are on the road. We're utilizing this much. Production is up by that. Da, 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 da. Sales, on the other hand, are like, well, yeah, I'm managing to sell more. My percentage is up. I'm managing to serve more clients. It's a different language, right? So so I guess my question to you, because you came from the engineering world, right, and now you're kind of bridging the gap. What did you have to adapt for yourself, right? So if you had to reflect back and think back, what were some of the things that you had to pick up, and maybe the light bulb moments, right, in your career when you made this shift into your new role?
It's a great question, and something I guess I've reflected on over the years. I think in manufacturing and supply chain, you're right. We tend to be quite engineering, data focused, I would say. Not even engineering. I'm not sure I was a particularly good engineer, but I think we're quite data focused. We like a lot of facts. So when we're explaining things, we start with, here's the problem, here are all the things that show me the problem, here are all the things that I did to find a resolution. Whereas when we're turning around and speaking with commercial, in my experience, they just want the bottom line up front. What does it mean? Tell it to me in one picture or one line. And that's a skill that I think we've had to learn over the years. Is we can't take all of the facts and figures and data that we as engineers and scientists would like to explain to you. We would like to explain to you the detail, whereas in actual fact, all we really need to tell you is the bottom line. What does it mean? And why is it good or why is it bad? And that's taken years, I think, and I'm still not there. I work a lot with my team to say, if you're taking that deck to commercial, you've got to cut it from 16 slides. It needs to be 2, and it needs to look good and deliver the message succinctly.
And then capture them within about 20 to 30 seconds, because I mean, they tend to be ADHD. I mean, we all live in an ADHD world, but it's
and maybe to be fair, Raju, I'm a little bit more probably to that direction myself than some of my other engineering colleagues.
Me too.
Maybe that's why I fit better in that world.
Maybe let's talk also some examples and case studies, and I know I asked you to kind of think through some of the things that you have been most proud, and lessons learned as well, challenges, some of the things that you've done across Pfizer supply chain and with your teams, and maybe you can give us some concrete examples as well.
Yeah, when you look back, I think there's lots of things that you could pull out, but I suppose specifically within the team and the function that I'm in now, we're relatively new, right? So we're about 2.5 years in Pfizer when we made some of these changes to match to the business units. And the big challenge for us as a supply chain organization is the complexity of the portfolio. So we have these, 400 products, 9,000 SKUs. Not every supply chain can be the same. So how do you look at those supply chains and design for the future? And so over the last 2.5 years, we've spent a lot of time on, first of all, segmenting. So at a SKU level, how do we deliver to the customer? Because not every SKU is the same. So we have medically necessary that we would deliver in one way. We have something that might be more in a genericized portfolio that we would deliver in a different way. And then also looking at what we would call categorization. So, products that are strategically important that we're going to invest in for the future, products that we actively manage, so we'll invest to maintain them, and then products that we maintain by exception because they're, they may be running very smoothly, they don't need a lot of intervention, the demand is flat, we put them on analytics and we run them. So running that process continually with commercial to say, do we all agree? Are we all aligned? These products are priority growth. These products are maintained by exception. Do we all understand what that means? And designing supply chains for the future. So it's been, it's a cultural change, right? Because we can say this product is maintained by exception, and at a global level it is. But in an individual market, that product could be very important to that market because of their patient population or how things are dispersed. So we've got to work not just globally, but also locally to explain that doesn't mean supply chain performance is going to change. It's not like we're not planning to deliver your product. It's how we manage it and how we invest for the future. So I would say we're still on that journey, and where it's been really important is that commercial partnership, because when we communicate as commercial and supply chain together. So I don't communicate to a market, your product is a priority growth or maintained by exception. We do that hand in hand with commercial. And that's been quite successful in terms of allowing us to focus where it our resources where it really matters, because we can't have the same level of resourcing on 400 products. So that's been a process we've put in place, and I think it's worked well for us, and I think it's a sea change in the way that we've looked at our supply chains.
Mm. And if I want to ask you to reflect on, what was the 10, usually this change management project, they boil down to a few very important things that when you do that right, it kind of works, and if you don't do that right, then nothing. So if you had to think, right, in retrospect, what mattered most, right, to get this, it's still work in progress, but to get it through, to do this change management.
And I mean, I think it links a little bit probably to the second piece I was going to talk about too, but it is actually where we've focused a lot on data, right? So increasing our digitization and our analytics. So the ability to say, this is a lens that we're looking at within the commercial arena. So that's margin, it's patient need, so medically necessary, medically significant, and that's data driven. But then also on the supply side to say, we're looking at a lens of reliability, supply chain performance, capability, and being able to pull that data together and to put it in a way, I get back to our earlier conversation, that makes sense, that people can look at it and it's, okay, yeah, so this percentage of our products are sit in this category because they fit these criteria, and we've all agreed upfront what the criteria are. But you need the data to be able to do that. And that's been a sea change, right? How we have data availability and how we're using it for analytics.
And okay, we have a couple of questions. I'll pull one. Let's see if we can decipher it, right? So
an easy one to start.
Yes, Eric, I don't know if it's easy, because you talked about data, right? So, and ultimately, everybody exists for the customer, right? So Sarika is asking, how do you basically look, or what are the things that you look after, right, to make sure that you are, well, I guess retention is one, and hopefully there's growth as well, right? Maybe the second part of this question.
Yeah, so in some ways, where we start is actually who is the customer, because the customer can be differentiated depending on those supply chains. So for some products, we will have a very specific patient population. We can identify them. We know who their HCPs might be, their healthcare professionals. We've got a lot of information from commercial. So who are they and what do they need? And we're looking at data that's then specific to their needs. So demand, what the long range forecast looks like, where the cost point is for those patients. On the other side, it may be just numbers, right? So what's the actual demand look like, and how do we deliver that? So I think it's not necessarily an analysis. It is actually back to that very key question: who is the customer and what are we delivering to them? And then you set the parameters by which you do your analysis, because the lens will be different depending on who the customer is.
And in recent times, well, I don't know if it's recent, 12, 14 months, I guess, we've had the pandemic, we still have it. We've had major disruptions across the board, from Suez Canal to strikes to factories being shut down to semiconductors to, I'll stop there because the list goes on and on and on and on, right? So, and it seems that I was reading, I think that didn't affect much, but there's also a volcano that erupted again in Iceland pretty significantly. So I hope not. So, so I guess what's keeping you up at night, right? You have all these things that seem to be the new norm, right? That there's going to be a disruption. Not every week, but quite often. So from where you sit, right? What's top of mind?
Yeah, so I think we look back over the last 15 months, and there's a couple of things actually that probably help me sleep, as well as the ones that keep me up at night. I think we saw the fruition of some of the work that we had been doing to make sure that we had done appropriate risk assessment and mitigation across supply chains. So, we've had huge disruption, and not just at supply chain level, but at the patient level. For us in the business that I'm in, when patients don't go to the doctor, they don't get prescribed prescriptions. So now your forecast is volatile, because then when they do go, instead of a doctor giving them a prescription for a month, he may give them the prescription for 6 months, because he or she doesn't want them traveling during a pandemic. So your forecast becomes much more volatile in some of those products. So we've had that huge disruption, but we have pivoted. And, I think we're all really proud of not just the vaccine, but the fact that in this period, we have supplied our hundreds of millions of patients almost without disruption. Not completely, right, but almost without disruption. And that's because we had mitigation plans in place. We were able to change transportation lanes. We had inventory that we were able to use to support that volatility. So for me, that has been, a justification of the work that we had been doing in previous years. And sometimes it's like buying insurance, you buy it and you kind of feel you didn't get value for money because you never used it. But then when an accident happens, you have it. And I think that's been a validation of us saying for many years, it's really important that we plan for the future, that we look at risk mitigation. So that sort of helps me sleep a little bit to say we've been doing the right things. I don't think we're done on the risk assessment piece, right? Because I don't think any of us ever planned for a risk of, 50% of a site population being unable to work. How do you then prioritize under those circumstances? That our global transportation lanes would completely overnight, no passenger planes, that's a huge change. So how do we now design a risk mitigation plan and process that takes into account factors that we never imagined? And so that's the creative piece. We now need people to be creative in terms of the types of risks we may see into the future. So that kind of keeps me up, because I don't think we ever thought we'd saw a pandemic, and now we have. I think we're all like, okay, what's next? And how do we plan for that? So that's one. And then I think for me, the other piece that we're really focused on and we've got to continue to work on is the data piece, and being able to use data to predict better what's going to happen. Not even for the big pandemics, but actually for the normal things. So where can we use to move to autonomous supply chain, autonomous planning, so that our people can focus on when the things go bump in the night, because the normal things are running much more smoothly. So how do we move to using data to just analyze what happened in the past, to being able to use it to predict what's going to happen in the future and to take those decisions earlier?
And I'll pull this question. Manuel is asking about SNOP now. Okay, SNOP is one. Recent times, recent. It's not that recent, but integrated business planning has come of age, if I can use that term. There's all sorts of different software providers that talk about cognitive automation, about all sorts of very smart systems. Maybe tell us a little bit about your view on this, and do you use it? Is it useful? Way to go?
Yeah, so I think probably like everybody, we use a combination of all processes because we are, globally located. We've got, just operations spread across the world, and we do, starting at the very top level, we do executive SNOPs, which are at a very high level in terms of signaling to the business, risks or opportunities that we see. We do them at a brand level. So for those priority growth, actively managed brands, we do SNOPs. We do them at a market level. But then we also use autonomous planning. We use analytics for those products that they're probably in that maintained by exception bucket that I referred to, that can run without a lot of intervention. So we don't necessarily bring those into SNOP because they don't need that level of attention. And we do have then within our organization a very structured way of monitoring performance and taking action. So we call it IMEX, which is Integrated Manufacturing Excellence. It's really an evolution of that sort of operational excellence journey we were on, where at the level that the work is occurring, we're looking for outliers, taking action, and then escalating to the next level. So running through that kind of tiered process of escalation, both functionally and then horizontally to make sure that we're communicating. Which is a very long-winded answer to say it depends, right? Because I think you have to design to the business need, and the businesses are so different. I mean, I'm internal medicine, but we have a rare disease business, we have an oncology business, and their customers and needs are different to mine. And so we do have to standardize where we can. And we do put a lot of emphasis on that, because otherwise I think you spend a lot of time recreating the same process in multiple different places. So we standardize where we can, and then where we can't, you have to use a combination of all the tools that are available to you.
And how do you, I guess this is a question that I've been asking a lot. I mean, all this technology, software, you name it, basically it's advancing so fast. I was talking recently with a number of renowned global professors within supply chain. They themselves cannot keep up with all that is happening. So I guess you, as a practitioner, obviously you have a day job, right? You need to run a business, you need to run a team. How do you also keep abreast of all this technology changes and new things that come in? It's almost it's almost unreal how fast it can happen, right?
Yeah, it is, and it's, in some ways I think it's unrealistic to expect that we're all keeping up with it. I would say one benefit I have seen from the pandemic, if we can say it's a benefit, but actually some of the kind of conferences and opportunities that have gone online means that I've actually been able to pop in and out to see sessions, where that would never have happened if those were live, because you say, okay, I can't go for 4 days, but now, okay, well, I can join for 2 hours a day. So that's been, for me, that's been a great opportunity. On the flip side, for the pandemic, I would have to say that, I mean, I love to read, and I would have been a strong reader of articles and books. I've found it harder to concentrate in the last year. So I do the podcast thing I do, and I listen to that as I walk. And then the other piece for us, I think because it clearly was a really good time to do this, we're working on what we call Vision 2025, which is the vision for supply chain in Pfizer for the future. So my peers, and we have teams in our organization working on different strands of things like, patient centricity, what the supply chain of the profession of the future looks like. And we're kind of doing this project right across supply chain to examine those different strands. And actually that's a brilliant way to get that information as part of our working day, because we try to spend a little bit of time as a leadership team, every week, and a little bit more time every month as part of our leadership team meeting, delving into some of those areas. And I mean, on the digital side of it, I love the data, I love the analytics. I'm not particularly brilliant at it. And so one of the things I really admire is I admire the people who can help with those visualizations, right? So when I say, actually, what I really want to see is, I want to see if I increase volume, reduce margin, like what does that do to absorption? And some of our team can say, okay, yeah, we can do that, Emer, and they turn it around and give me back a visualization. And that's a skill, I would love to have, but I'm lucky in that I can lean and pull from those who have it.
Yeah, well, I mean, ultimately, that's the goal of the team, to complement skills. And then, I actually, now that you mentioned it, I realized that I'm in discussions for one of your colleagues, and I'm going to be speaking at one of these conferences. And I was actually very pleasantly surprised. And the topic is the supply chain executive of the future that they want me to share on. I almost felt, I hope I have something relevant to say. But it's a great initiative in terms of internal sharing, and I think it's Pfizer, it's a couple of other organizations that have been doing this, and again, this online medium, whilst of course it's been tough for all of us from a personal interaction, but I think it does also create an environment which can facilitate sharing at this level. So it's kudos and great stuff, great initiatives. Now, on the topic of skills, right? So and people in general and in supply chain, I'd love also to get your input in terms of what do you see, and you mentioned data, you mentioned analytics. What do you see as, I guess, the superpowers that teams need to have? I mean, not necessarily each individual, not all of us need to have it, but what are some of the key skills, whether it's hard or soft, that supply chain teams need to stay relevant and on their toes?
Yeah, I guess we are probably not hugely different from other teams, right? Probably some of the skills are going to be the same. I think the last 15 months have shown us that resilience and agility is key. to be able to say, oh, okay, there are no flights. Let's figure out a different way, and to be able to pivot. So that resilience is really important, but only comes with experience, right? I don't think you can teach that, right? People learn that as they go through their career. I think one of the pieces that we haven't focused on enough, and we do need to into the future, is actually building supply chain professionals of the future. And it varies globally in terms of where people come into supply chain. How do they enter supply chain? Do they enter from college? Do they enter through the business? And if they're entering through the business, I think it brings, it certainly brings a level of holistic view. But then they're starting on the back foot in terms of, having some of those skills around SAP and data, and how do we upskill people? And then it is certainly for those of us that are from engineering and scientific backgrounds, realizing that it's the people actually that is important, and not necessarily the data. So for all I've spoken about the data, if we don't have the right people in the team, you're not going to get what you need from all the wonderful data. And I think, like many companies, we've suffered in the past from having an excess of data without the people to actually interpret what does that mean. So it's all very well to have all of this data, but if we don't have people with those analytical skills who can look at it and say, this is what that means, then we're not making the progress that we need to make. So, as we look at people leaders, that pivot, which I think has happened globally, to a people leader is not necessarily the technical expert in their area, but is actually the best person to lead a team and to get the best out of those team members is something that we look for into the future. And then I think, like everybody, we've got to focus on diversity and making sure that our supply chain teams reflect the communities that we serve. So that's both gender and race and sexual orientation, that supply chain teams need to be reflective of society. And that's a work in progress, I would say, for everybody.
And most books mention the three components of any successful business, right? Which tend to be people, process, processes, technology. And to your point, I was on a different panel yesterday, and one of the speakers made this very clearly, just kind of following what you just shared, is that typically companies focus a lot on processes and technology. They don't really focus as much as they should on the people element, because ultimately, if you have the process, you have the technology, but people are not on board, not sure it's that relevant. So,
and I think what we've seen, right, is that when the technology fails and the processes are disrupted, if we have the right people, we can still support the business. But if you don't have the people, the processes and the technology are not going to get your customer what they need. And I think the last 15 months have shown us that, where processes that we've had in place for decades and which have served us well, all of a sudden were no longer fit for purpose because the world environment had changed. So without having the right people in place, we wouldn't have been able to adapt those processes. So I absolutely agree with you. We all look at the 3 Ps, and to be honest, would love to work on the process and technology, because those are easier fixes, right? I mean, those are technically, we can do that, but we really need to focus on the people.
Yeah. And I'd like also to ask you, reflecting back on your career, what was some of the most useful principles that you applied? Maybe if you were to look back, 1 or 2, maybe for the younger audience, not necessarily younger as well, mid-level, right? What helped you the most in your career?
Yeah, so it's funny, look back and people say, did you have a plan? And of course the answer was no. I mean, I had no plan really. And I mean, I came out of college as a chemical engineer. I didn't envisage supply chain. I don't know that we ever even covered it in the curriculum. I mean, I don't remember it being a thing. So, but I think what had served me well is that I just took opportunities. So as they came up, I said, yeah, actually, that's interesting. I'm going to do that. So I took secondments because the work in and of itself was interesting. And then the curiosity of, so this could lead to that. Right, well, then I'll try that. And then I took quite a lot of lateral moves, right, to try to learn technologies, the business, and then into supply chain, because while I was fascinated by what supply chain delivered, I didn't really understand it until I worked in it. So I think that curiosity and taking those opportunities, and I probably didn't overthink it, to be honest, Radu. I probably just did some of it and said, oh, this looks good, let's do this for a while, and that has served me well.
Look, I cannot stress how important not overthinking is. And I think we as humans, we are almost geared, it's almost impossible. And typically the nutcases, the entrepreneurs, there's certain profiles of people that tend not to think so much, and then they're very action focused, and it tends to serve well, because most of the times, for example, with social media, just taking that as an example, right? I mean, people ask us a lot, oh, how do you build a profile on social media and all of that? Well, the simple answer is you post and you try to learn from your post, and you do it again, and then you post relevant to your audience, and then you see what works, and then you do it again. But then they never actually get to the stage of actually posting, because they think, oh, but this is not I'm not inventing like Einstein the next theory of relativity. Well, nobody's expecting you to, right? So if that's your standard, you're never going to do anything, right? So it applies in so many areas. So I love when you said that, not overthinking, because sometimes, you just need to plunge, and then you figure out how to swim, and it kind of works out, right?
And also, I think trying to predict, is this step going to get to that step, that's a rabbit hole, because you can, there's no answer to that question, right? All you can do is say, well, is the next step interesting? Would I be good at that? Well, yeah, I'll do this next step, and let's see where this step brings. Whereas you can get sucked down into that rabbit hole of, is this the right move to get to here? And maybe others have better career planning than I have, but that's certainly been my process.
I'll build on that with another example. I was talking to a CEO, and he was saying that he finds it bewildering for himself when he has this high performers, they want to, and Generation Y, millennials, there's a lot being said that they want to get promoted so fast. And he was saying, like, rather they come to me, oh yeah, 2-3 years, I need to promote, I need to get, I'm like, relax, like, first and foremost, do what you're currently doing. Of course, do a great job, because but why do you need to stress yourself already with you just started this job and you're already stressing with the next 5 steps? Like, come on, like, also that the world is changing, the organizations evolve, right? So of course, do a great job. I mean, if you don't deliver, then unlikely that you're gonna.
That's a different.
But focus on where you are, today, right? I mean, stop thinking so much in the future that is like, okay, so I mean, who actually can predict? Who would have predicted COVID? Who would have? I mean, obviously, there's different types of personalities, and there's people that are way more structured than others. But in general, I haven't come across too many that can read the future accurately.
And I think it's a great point that the world is changing. I mean, if I look back over the last 15 years, I don't think any of the roles that I had existed before I had them, right? So that was part of a restructure or a new program or something. So, if you had said 15 years ago, oh, it's internal medicine supply chain, everybody would have looked at you and went, well, that doesn't exist. There isn't such an organization. So that's been a big learning for me, because you think, well, you can plan all you like, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going to be there when you get there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Emer, on that note, I want to thank you for your time. We've had quite a few other questions. I'll take you separately. You can answer some offline as well. Been a pleasure to have you. Thanks for the candid sharing. I am going to pull before we go. Romeo, here you go. There's compliments for being so original. So, one of many good comments. And wishing you lots and lots of interesting excitements and fun, and then keep up the great work at Pfizer.
And thank you so much, Raju, and thanks everybody. It was lovely to speak to you.